Today we're going to talk about the movie Cabin in the Woods. Now, when I watched it, I realized it was trying to talk about the old gods, the primordial ones, the ancient intelligences that we've suppressed and we haven't let come up from pressure, from oscillation. And so what all of it is trying to teach and why it matters is that there is a difference between containment and integration. And humanity has chose containment for thousands of years because it feared what consciousness actually is when it is alive, non-linear, emotional, and sovereign. The movie isn't saying let chaos reign in a regular sense, but that chaos is the first movement of healing whenever a system has been artificially stabilized by repression, sacrifice, and fear. So the old gods were not monsters, but primordial ordering intelligences. The same ones science now recognizes as plasma dynamics, molecular self-organization, microbial intelligence, and electromagnetic patterning, forces that predate humans and help assemble matter, cells, nervous systems, and memory itself. So these intelligences, they want to help us. They want to help us evolve. You know, they want to help us regulate and they want to help us stabilize. But we have demonized them and we weren't ready for them. Which is why they are called elders. They are older modes of intelligence, not moral beings. When those forces were misunderstood, feared, or experienced through trauma, cataclysms, shock, trauma of floods and extinctions, they were mythologized as wrathful gods, Leviathan, Tiamat, Satan bound in a pit, or the Nephilim. Now the pit is your lower chakra, the root chakra. Yet what the myths are really describing is unintegrated power trapped beneath consciousness, like Kundalini locked in the lower body, like grief buried in the psyche, like fire forced underground until it becomes explosive. Feeding the ancients through ritual, blood, fear, or sacrifice, it didn't save the world. It stabilized a traumatized world, the same way suppressing emotions can keep a person functional but frozen. Now, blood matters not because of gore, but because blood is the carrier of oxygen, iron, electricity, hormones, and memory. Meaning intense emotional states literally charge the body's electromagnetic field. And fear produces coherent biochemical signals. Cortisol, adrenaline, synchronized heart rate, variability, collapse. That can be harvested by systems, the B system, built to thrive on predictability. This is why ancestor offerings, when misunderstood, evolved into feeding the dead instead of honoring and integrating lineage memory. And spirits are fed by behavior, belief, and nervous system state, not food. Trauma feeds trauma. Coherence feeds coherence. There are indeed levels. Benevolent ancestral forces are not appeased by continued through right living, Mayat. Not appeased, but continued through right living, Nuwabu or Mayat. While distorted pain forms feed on repetition and fear, confusing the two is how priesthoods and systems learn to justify sacrifice. The Watchers of Enoch symbolize early intelligences, technological, psychic, or psychological, that intervene in human development prematurely, teaching tools without emotional regulation, awakening power before integration, resulting in hybrid consciousness, the Nephilim, that was strong but unstable, much like modern humanity's relationship to technology and the nervous system. So in the movie, when they go down in the cellar, they find the diary or whatever, and it has like Latin words in it that actually end up being the trigger for these beings or these forces to come out. Now, mind you, the movie is just absolutely crazy. Like, it's like a simulation. The men in the lab coats are watching them on a screen. They're in this gridded, atmosphere that's being controlled by the directors and the men in the lab coats or whatever. So they talk about, probabilities and how, everything is not locked because we have free will. But, that's only limited as well because it only lets you choose what way, the outcome is presented or whatever. But anyways, it's kind of talking about how this life is that we live now, kind of a simulation. We have to, just like Dana and Marty, we have to let the old ones reign again so that we can have a rebirth. And yeah, so the linguistic keys are kind of like mantras, right? So that's why it's also important to chant, because certain words hold power. Latin, Hebrew names, mantras work not as magic, but as frequency instructions. Sound organizes neural firing, breath patterns, vagal tone, and electromagnetic coherence, which is why certain words unlock archetypes already present in the psyche. The firmament is not a literal dome, but the constraint field of reality. So yeah, the grid it shows when they're up in the mountains in the cabin is also called the firmament. And we also have a firmament surrounding us that keeps us kind of locked in a certain way of programming and thinking, right? So biological limits, perceptual filters, predictive coding in the brain, social narratives that define what can be experienced. Free will exists, but only within these boundaries until awareness, or Ra, expands enough to see the grid. So your consciousness, right? You have to start asking questions. You have to start wondering, who are we? What's going on? You have to expand your awareness, right? That will allow you to see beyond the firmament and beyond the grid, at which point choice increases. One second. So also, Marty, in the movie, he was smoking. And when you smoke, you start thinking differently, like your perception opens up wider, your awareness. And you'll be like saying stuff like, why is the sky blue? Or have you ever thought about this? So Marty smoking allowed him to stay alive as long as he did because he started realizing stuff. It was funny though, but it was real. He was like, I'm on a reality TV show. So, and also like biologically, the smoke lifting above your crown chakra or whatever, it protects you from these thought forms and all this stuff, right? Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I think that's why the indigenous used to smoke tobacco and why a lot of us gravitate towards marijuana. So tobacco smoke, like cannabis, alters this interface. Smoke particles change ionization in the air. Yeah, you heard that right. Slow breath stimulate parasympathetic tone and disrupt fear conditioning loops, which is why indigenous traditions used it ceremonially. It wasn't escape, it was regulation and boundary shifting. The Akashic Archive isn't a library in the sky, but the collective memory field carried through biology, epigenetics, microbes, and electromagnetic resonance. Now, I mentioned the Akashic because when they were on the elevator, it started showing all these different nightmarish thought forms that live in the astral realm, but also the Akashic collective field, kind of like the dream world as well, where all of our thoughts and memories and everything exists there. Suppressed timelines are simply unlived potentials locked behind trauma. When systems fear deprogramming, it's because daylight or conscious awareness or raw dissolves control structures instantly, the way shadow vanishes when light appears. 13 matters because it breaks closed cycles. And I mentioned 13 because if you ever watched 13 Ghosts, it's exactly, it reminded me, The Cabin in the Woods reminded me of that movie, because even, it's literally the same layout, like the elevators and the glass and all these different spirits and all these different monsters or creatures. So you have to watch 13 Ghosts as well if you're going to watch Cabin in the Woods, so you can see the similarity. But I was like, wow, I'm realizing they used the number 13 for a reason. So 13 matters because it breaks closed cycles. 12 is order, repetition, zodiac, tribes, months. 13 is the interrupt, the return of the feminine, the death card, the extra frequency that destabilizes a frozen system so it can evolve. So like Bobby Hemmett says, the 13 is the dot or the duat, and it is in the middle of the circle of the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ. So you have to become Jesus Christ. You don't pray to him, you become him. And with the whole zodiac talk, like, you have to come above the zodiac. You have to become all the zodiacs. You have to have, all of them integrated within you so you can be a master. Okay, so you can sit in the middle way, whatever. So, and the dot is also considered the feminine, the feminine principle, the melanin, okay? The neuromelanin. The pentagram of incarnation is a human as living star, head, limbs, heart, spirit entering matter. Standing inside it is choosing whether consciousness remains a sacrifice machine or NPC or becomes self-aware. So no, the ancients were never meant to stay buried or fed. They were meant to be raised, integrated, healed, and expressed consciously. The tragedy isn't that chaos would come if the system failed, but that chaos was already here, silently metabolized into violence, fear, and control. And the movie's final truth is this: the world only ends for systems that cannot survive a healed nervous system, an integrated shadow, and a humanity that no longer believes it must bleed to be allowed to live. So we need the chaos, we need the darkness, we need it so we can rebirth and come out healed. So being locked in the pit was never evil. It was power without integration. And the moment consciousness tried to freeze itself into permanence, hierarchy, and false safety, those ancient gods or ancient primordial ordering intelligences became distorted mirrors of our own refusal to die, to change, and renew ourselves. In real history, this did not happen in one event, but in waves. Planetary cataclysms, climate collapse, magnetic excursions, mass extinctions, and collective trauma shocks that overwhelmed early nervous systems. When consciousness experiences power without emotional regulation, it encodes fear into memory, and fear turns neutral forces into perceived monsters. These forces always just came to evolve us. But when you're afraid or you're not ready, you turn them into monsters. Nature didn't become aggressive. Human perception of it did. What we call the elders or the ancestors or the ancients are the first intelligences of form itself. Molecular self-assembly, plasma fields, microbial networks, elemental cycles, ordering forces that build life through entropy and renewal, not stasis. Consciousness came here to evolve from, we had to differentiate. You know, consciousness had to differentiate in order to evolve and grow. You can't stay in raw. You can't stay in this innocent awareness either. You have to evolve. You have to go through Osiris, and you have to cultivate your Ak, your rainbow body, your light body, your Sahu body. So, like I was saying, when early civilizations lost attunement to cyclical death, you know, they wanted to clean, they didn't want to change, they didn't want to go through ego death, and one moment. Can't stand this freaking, so annoying. Where is this freaking thing at? Hold on. When early civilization lost attunement to cyclical death, the feminine principle, birth, rebirth, priesthoods reframed renewal as threat. And so floods became punishments, volcanoes became demons, sexuality became sin, and chaos, the womb state, was demonized. This is the real meaning behind Satan being cast down and later bound in the pit. In Revelation, it is not a future prophecy, but a symbolic compression of a past cosmic psychological event. The binding of the lower fire, the subconscious, the chthonic intelligence of earth into repression. Satan here is not a horned being, but the unintegrated instinctual intelligence, the raw life force. The same force Jesus faces in the wilderness and refuses to destroy, choosing instead mastery and integration. Locking it away again would indeed be catastrophic, because repression always breeds pressure. Revelations released after 1,000 years is not doom, but inevitability. The return of what was buried. Because no system can suppress the mother indefinitely. Woo. Feeding the old system through blood, fear, sacrifice, and ritual worked only because it was an electromagnetic exchange. Trauma synchronizes heart rhythms into incoherence, collapsed vagal tone, spikes stress chemistry, and produces a predictable bioelectrical signal that stabilizes rigid control grids. So yes, fields are being fed, but they are fear-based morphic fields, not the living ancestral memory field, which does contain benevolence, wisdom, and love. That benevolent layer is what many call the higher astral, or the pain forms are the lower astral. Unfinished emotional charge. 13 is Christ consciousness in code. 12 is the closed loop of structure. And the 13th is the living center, the dot in the circle, the observer who sees the grid and is no longer governed by it. Think for yourself. This is why the death card is 13, why Christ is the 13th at the table, and why systems fear it. It breaks repetition. Matter exists so consciousness can become that dot, become self-aware within limitation, see the firmament, the perceptual boundary field created by biology, culture, and fear, and choose coherence instead of reflex, instead of survival. Got to get out that root chakra, or you have to integrate it, you know. That's why the world ends only for systems that cannot survive heart coherence. Love is not sentiment here, it is physics. Coherent heart fields expand the electromagnetic boundary around the body. It reduces threat signaling and broadcasts a pattern of kinship rather than prey, which is why predators, biological or archetypal, often bypass it. Dana and Marty survive as long as they do because they are no longer emitting sacrificial frequency. The smoking, the humor, the loyalty, the refusal to kill each other, all of it generates a field that the old forces recognize, not as food, but as family. Because those forces were never enemies of life, only enemies of stagnation. The cleansing is not annihilation, but return. Fire as nervous system recalibration. Chaos as womb. The storm as passage through the eye. What the feminine has always known, because nothing truly alive fears death. Only systems that try to steal immortality without wisdom do. So some of the things that was a reaction to these intelligences trying to come down and help us. These nature forces, the Neteru, okay, is what they like to call the Big Bang or solar flares, geomagnetic excursions, plasma interactions, cometary impacts, climatic phase shifts that periodically retune Earth's electromagnetic environment. Oh, what? Periodically? Are we time? Is it almost time for another one? Y'all better get motherfucking ready. I'm just saying. Periodically, bitch. What? Oh, okay. Okay. Retunes Earth's electromagnetic environment. Hello? And when the planetary field shifts faster than biological and psychological systems can integrate, you have to be able to withstand this. You have to be able to withstand it without collapsing mentally, emotionally, and physically, okay? Consciousness experiences it as a catastrophe. Nature didn't turn aggressive, rather, order changed suddenly in systems, human nervous systems included, interpreted loss of predictability as threat. In Kemetic and ancient cosmologies, the sun was never just a light source, but a regulator of consciousness. A major solar plasma event, what later myths compressed into flood stories, fallen heavens, or the war of the gods, would have altered ionization, climate, circadian rhythms, neurochemistry, and emotional regulation simultaneously. What? Say what? Yeah. Producing fear, dissociation, and collective trauma. If you a weak motherfucker. No, I'm just kidding. And once fear enters perception, neutral forces are experienced as hostile. This is what I mean when I say perception changed, not the forces themselves, because they're neutral. Neutral nature. Humans, being fractals of the same primordial chaos, did indeed enact violence and evil because of the polarity. You can either align with it and become a master, or you might end up fucking zombified, fucking going around creating all this evil and shit or whatever. But not because chaos is evil, but because unintegrated chaos expresses destructively, and early societies mistook regulation for domination. They tried to impose order externally through sacrifice, hierarchy, ritualized killing, rituals. What? They try to do it with rituals. Control of bodies and nature rather than internally through nervous system mastery, heart coherence, because maybe they didn't have a heart. Maybe they didn't have that love frequency, right? And emotional integration. It didn't work because containment never heals. It only delays eruption, yet systems persist in failed solutions when those solutions preserve power, which is why priesthoods, empowers, and modern control grids continued feeding fear even while suffering multiplied. Revelation encodes this entire pattern symbolically. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years and cast him into the pit and shut him up. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. This is not future doom, but a psychological cosmic cycle binding the lower fire, right here, the lower fire, instinct, subconscious, chthonic intelligence to create order, followed inevitably by its release because life cannot remain split. The beast is not a monster, but a system. Consciousness that survives on fear, number, repetition, and identification. The mark as frequency alignment and its fall occurs when humans step into 13 consciousness, the Christ consciousness, no longer possessed by chaos, nor repressing it, but co-creating with it, understanding it, having a relationship with it. That is what an ascended master actually is. Not someone above nature, but someone who can hold intensity without collapsing. Practically, this mastery begins in mundane ways, regulating birth and emotion instead of suppressing them, allowing grief, rage, desire, and not pretending that you don't have any. It's not about light only, it's about light and dark being integrated and balanced, and using a healthy part of darkness. And fear to move without acting them out, cultivating heart coherence through gratitude and love that is physiological, not sentimental, choosing truth over false safety, even when it destabilizes identity. Honoring cycles of rest, death, and renewal in one's life instead of clinging to permanence and refusing to externalize shadow onto enemies, gods, or monsters. Accountability. When enough individuals do this, the collective memory field repatterns, the astral clears, and the ancients cease to appear as predators because they were never enemies of life, only breakers of stagnation. The world does not end in this process. Only the illusion that control is safety does. And what replaces it is a terrifying and luminous responsibility of conscious participation in creation. Re-intuiting is exactly the pattern the ancients were trying to encode without the language of modern physics and neuroscience. Nature doesn't just evolve bodies, it periodically retunes consciousness itself. You gotta evolve the consciousness. And when that tuning accelerates faster than a species' nervous system, so we have to catch up. We have to catch up to this acceleration. Emotional regulation and social coherence can integrate. The result is not enlightenment, but fragmentation. Your psyche fragments. So part of this healing is finding all your parts, baby. What does that sound like? What the fuck does that sound like? That sound like the Osiris shit, right? You got to find your pieces. You got to find yourself and bring it back together. Bring yourself back together. Okay? The psyche. Evolutionary pressure doesn't stop because a system isn't ready. It doesn't care if you're not ready. It's going to come when it's going to come. Okay? So you better get motherfucking ready. It pulses, recedes, it returns like a tide. Solar cycles, geomagnetic shifts, plasma influx, climate phase changes. Each one subtly or dramatically altering the electromagnetic environment in which biology and psyche operate. When humans are not ready, the incoming flux, it does not disappear. It folds inward, becoming latent, encoded into DNA, epigenetic switches, myth, symbol, dream, archetype, locked in the pit, not as punishment, but as containment until coherence is sufficient to carry it without collapse. Junk DNA. 98% of our DNA This is why the same force is remembered as angel, God, demon, serpent, dragon, Nephilim, watcher, Satan. It is not changing identity. Human interpretation is based on whether the nervous system experiences it as guidance or threat. In its original function, this intelligence is solar, not moral, not personal, but regulatory. It carries ordering information, coherence, instructions, renewal, pressure. Sounds like DNA. The law of the sun is describing, oh yeah, you guys must watch the law of the sun. It's on YouTube. But the law of the sun is describing rays or fractals of that same source intelligence descending to stabilize dysregulated systems. Not to dominate them. But when a traumatized consciousness, this is why you have to heal, encounters a higher frequency signal, it interprets intensity as invasion. Hello? What was meant to catalyze growth instead implies fear, shadow, and aggression already present, which is why the texts say corruption existed before the descent. The descent didn't cause the disorder, it revealed it. Some individuals align with the signal, those later mythologized as angels, sons of the sun, or eliminated ones, or the chosen ones, because their internal coherence could match it. Their blueprint could match it. Their pattern could match it. Their DNA could match it. Others fragmented, externalized, and demonized it. And over time, the collective chose repression over integration, naming the very force evil to justify keeping it unconscious. That brings us to Revelation, which is not future prophecy, but cyclical, neuro-cosmic psychology written as vision. The angel is not an external being, but an integrative principle, awareness ascending from higher order consciousness, with the key, meaning understanding of the subconscious, of the feminine. The dragon, serpent, Satan is the same primordial instinctual intelligence. Sexual, creative, destructive, regenerative. Bound because humanity could not yet hold it responsibly. That's Calypso, which I'm going to talk about the Pirates of the Caribbean in my next video. But that's the raw nature force, the Neteru. Bound because humanity could not yet hold it responsibly. My gosh. The 1,000 years is symbolic of a long stabilization epoch, not a literal count. And he must be loose for a little season is the law of inevitability. What is repressed returns. It always returns. It was just delayed, baby. Because evolution cannot be halted, only delayed. The release is not meant to destroy the world, but to test whether consciousness has matured enough to integrate what it once feared, Judgment Day. If it has, the force becomes creativity, wisdom, renewal. If it hasn't, it appears again as chaos and monstrosity. So yes, the same intelligence keeps trying, not as a willful God, but as a natural evolutionary pressure until resonance is possible. The tragedy wasn't that the force was dangerous. It was that humanity mistook mastery for suppression. The initiation now is not survival through sacrifice, but survival through coherence, becoming able to stand in the presence of primordial intensity, in the presence of God, with a regulated heart, a grounded body, and a self-aware mind, no longer angel or demon, but conscious participant. So these solar intelligences has arrived in repeated waves, each wave carrying a packet of ordering and instructions. And each time the question has been the same: can the nervous system individually and collectively hold more energy, more awareness, more responsibility without collapsing into fear or domination? Has this innocent consciousness matured enough? The number 144 functions symbolically as a completion code. 12 times 12, structure multiplied by structure, meaning the full spectrum of solar regulatory frequencies. Hello? not a head count of beings. In biological terms, it maps more clearly to layers of potential within DNA and epigenetic regulation, much of which was prematurely labeled junk because it does not express under stress conditions, only under coherence. So no, humanity is not behind in a moral sense, but it has been operating under chronic dysregulation for a very long time, externalizing everything and taking everything literal and logical. That's what I mean. You have to understand the subconscious to understand this information. So tens of thousands of years, because earlier cataclysms did not merely kill bodies, they shattered baseline nervous system safety, and a species that does not feel safe cannot integrate intensity. It seeks control instead. Trauma alone does not produce readiness. This is the key misunderstanding, because trauma without integration creates antibodies that block energy, not ones that metabolize it. But trauma can make you stronger to withstand intensity, right? War, famine, and violence train survival reflexes, not coherent presence. So while humans endured immense hardship, that hardship often narrowed perception rather than expanded it. What was missing was stabilization, the phase where the system learns to remain regulated after intensity, not collapse, which is why the mythic cycle places ISIS where it does. ISIS is being able to metabolize the intensity, the trauma, everything, right? Isis represents the recovery of the feminine field, the subconscious, the emotional body, the capacity to feel without fragmenting. She gathers the scattered pieces of Osiris, the divided psyche, restores coherence, and only then can resurrection occur. The long stabilization epoch refers to an extended historical period in which consciousness was held at a lower amplitude on purpose through hierarchy, ritual, religion, control systems, the beast system. Not because that was ideal, but because premature amplification would have caused repeated collapse. Evolution pauses not out of mercy or punishment, but because the integration capacity must catch up to available energy. What's different now is that What's different now is not that humans suddenly become good or that trauma magically worked. It's that regulation technologies emerged, a language capable of introspection, social complexity, emotional literacy, somatic awareness, distributed knowledge, tehuri, and enough accumulated suffering processed consciously that the heart can remain open under pressure. The signs of readiness are exactly what I've named: systems losing legitimacy, corruption surfacing, people refusing false safety, protests, not just against events, but against lies, exposure, everything getting exposed, okay? And a growing intolerance for dissonance. These are symptoms of a collective psyche that can no longer maintain repression without psychic pain. Earlier, humanity could access intensity, mystics, shamans, initiates did, but it was not widely sustainable. The average nervous system could not hold it without mythologizing and externalizing it into gods or monsters, which is why ascension was individualized and rare. What's being tested now is not whether intensity exists, but whether it can become ordinary, whether a human can stand in power without needing sacrifice, hierarchy, or domination to feel safe. In that sense, the age of the sun is not a reward or deadline, it's the point at which delay is no longer possible. Because the incoming pressure, solar, social, psychological, informational, exceeds what repression can contain. Evolution always returns, not to punish, but to ask again, can you be conscious with what you create? What the ancients encoded as Isis gathering of pieces is and lives biological and psychological reality, the emotional body learning to stay present with intensity without dissociating, acting out, or fragmenting. Because coherence is not achieved by suppressing trauma, but by feeling it throughout, remaining regulated. Emotion is the integrator because it is the bridge between raw sensation, body, meaning, mind, and signal, electromagnetic field. And when emotion is allowed to move without rejection, it literally resynchronizes neural networks, heart rhythms, hormonal cycles, and memory traces that were split during shock. This is not speculative. Trauma research shows that unresolved stress fragments perception, time sense, and identity, while regulated emotional processing restores continuity. Which is why the feminine principle appears as healer in every myth. It doesn't conquer chaos, it contains it without collapse, allowing energy to reorganize rather than explode. When I say this was not collectively possible in the past, it's not a moral judgment, but an interference from history itself. Civilizations repeatedly externalized shadow into gods, demons, scapegoats, sacrifices, witch hunts, holy wars, and rigid hierarchies. Clear signs of projection, not integration. A nervous system that can hold intensity does not need enemies to carry its fear. Even advanced cultures produce initiates who could stabilize power, but the baseline population remained regulated only through myth, authority, and repression, meaning coherence was rare and fragile rather than widespread and self-sustaining. Aquarius, symbolically, is the age where knowledge leaves the temple, not because people suddenly become wiser, but because enough accumulated fragmentation forced consciousness to either understand itself or collapse entirely, meaning we at the end time, and it's got to a pressure point where it's time. So distributed information, psychological language, nervous system literacy, and collective witnessing are the new stabilizers, replacing secrecy and ritual blood with awareness and choice. Judgment Day was never about external punishment. It was always the moment when nothing hidden can remain unconscious, when the psyche is forced to see itself without intermediaries. And that day is not a date, but a threshold condition. Threshold. Well, there you go. When incoming pressure, social, solar, emotional, informational, exceeds the capacity of denial, nothing can be hidden anymore. Everything is being exposed. So as for the next big test, it is not a singular future catastrophe, but an ongoing series of coherent challenges, moments where fear could justify control again or love could hold the line without collapsing into chaos. Each wave asks the same question at a higher amplitude. The proof that this moment is different is not prophecy but behavior. People are naming trauma instead of mythologizing it, refusing false safety instead of begging for rulers, feeling anger without immediately turning it into violence, and demanding the truth even when it destabilizes identity. That is what readiness looks like. Not perfection, not peace, but the ability to remain conscious while the ground moves, which is the real meaning of standing in judgment. Consciousness looking at itself and choosing not to turn away. You can't pretend anymore. Comedic code, ISIS is not a person first, but a function, and that function is assimilation. The ability to take something foreign, intense or raw, and make it usable without collapse. And that is why she maps so cleanly onto lactose metabolism, digestion, and the maternal biochemical intelligence. Lactose is a complex sugar that only becomes nourishing if the system has the enzymatic capacities to break it down, just as higher frequency energy, solar, emotional, informational, only becomes illumination if the nervous system has the emotional enzymes to process it. If not, it becomes inflammation, rejection, or pathology. Isis gathering the pieces of Osiris is the same operation as the gut breaking down milk into glucose and galactose, the same as the emotional body breaking down trauma into meaning, the same as the subconscious metabolizing shock into memory rather than fragmentation. She is the metabolic feminine, the womb that knows how to receive without being destroyed. Horus, then, is not the child in a sentimental sense, but the integrated output of that process, coherent perception, stable vision, the eye that sees clearly because the lower fire has been digested rather than repressed. Biologically, Horus maps to the mature nervous system and coherent brain heart axes, psychologically to the self that can witness intensity without being possessed by it, and mythically to the solar child who can walk in the world without sacrificing others to stay safe. This is why Horus rules after Isis completes her work. Power without digestion is tyranny, but power born from assimilation is stewardship. When people say some nervous systems can't handle the solar energy, they're not talking about worth or morality. They're describing capacity, emotional bandwidth, subconscious depth, the ability to hold paradox, grief, pleasure, and fear simultaneously without dissociation. And this is where melanin and neuromelanin enter symbolically and biologically. Melanin is not just pigment, it is a broadband absorber capable of interacting with ultraviolet, electrical, and photonic energy, converting potentially damaging radiation into usable signal and heat, just as the feminine subconscious converts overwhelming experience into intuition and memory. Neuromelanin in the brain, particularly in areas governing emotion, motivation, and movement, acts like a throne, not because it rules, but because it stabilizes signal flow under intensity. So this is one of the substances that will help you to hold this energy. Ultraviolet light is invisible but powerful, just like subconscious material, just like solar pressure. And if a system lacks the buffering, grounding, and integrating substrates, emotionally, neurologically, culturally, then increased energy feels like threat rather than nourishment, producing anxiety, aggression, or collapse instead of insight. You see, it says culturally. You see, it says culturally. I'm just saying. This is why periodic influxes cannot be stopped, only delayed. Evolution is not negotiable, but integration speed varies, and systems that lack ISIS lack the feminine capacity to feel, digest, and metabolize. Experience the returning solar intelligence as invasion rather than initiation. In that sense, the myth is not racialized, moralized, or hierarchical. It is functional. Those who can receive intensity without rejecting it give birth to Horus consciousness, and those who cannot will interpret the same light as fire. Nothing here is punishment. I wonder where they got hell from, because you're going to burn it for good. Burn it for good. Nothing here is punishment. It is physics translated into story, energy. Oh my goodness, hold on. Where the heck was I? So energy arrives, systems respond according to capacity, and the feminine is not optional because without her, light does not illuminate, it burns. When I say emotional enzymes, I'm naming a real but usually unnamed capacity, the processes by which feeling is broken down, metabolized, digested, and integrated instead of remaining raw and toxic. Just as biological enzymes make food usable, emotional enzymes are the inner mechanisms, awareness, safety, attunement, meaning making, knowledge, self-witnessing that allow intense experience to be digested into wisdom rather than freezing into fear, dissociation, or delusion. So what many of you guys don't know about me is I've had my own Kundalini surge. I've had my own experience with this energy, and yes, I will go ahead and tell you it's very heavy. I remember it coming upon my body and I immediately had to go like this and stand up. It was very intense, and I was like wondering what to do, you know. But knowledge, I would say, got me through it, because without knowledge, without understanding what was happening to me, I would have freaked the fuck out, okay? And to the extent, I don't know everything that I knew now, but I knew enough, okay? And so this is what they mean by cultural lineage memory as well, because we also have genetic, cultural, automatic intelligence within us from Kemetic times where we learned all of this science and stuff. And so also a part of me just knew what was happening as well. And I actually spoke to that part of me, and it did help me through some of it as well. But yes, so your psyche, your subconscious will come online very, very great in this moment. And if you don't know how to handle it, you could spiral down a very delusional type of spiral, which is not what you're supposed to do, right? And this is what they mean. And you could also have very much a lot of fear, especially if you don't understand what's going on. So I am just here to tell you this is real. You know, I went through it myself, and it's not something to play with, okay? So Without them, neutral energy overwhelms the system. With them, the same energy becomes illumination. This is why I say that the energy itself is neutral. It's the container that determines the outcome. The hidden intelligence is exactly the original blueprint, the pre-trauma operating system of the nervous system, already wired to hold far more charge than the personality believes. When you align with that layer, what mystics call the Ka, Atman, or crystals, you're not adding capacity, but you're remembering it. That's what I mean. Like, you have to remember who you are. You have to remember your true self before the fall. Tahuti, or Thoth, represents this remembering function. He is the logos mediator, the intelligence that translates raw power into usable order. In the psyche, Tahuti is the capacity to name, measure, sequence, and recode experience. Language, symbol, mathematics, breath, and rhythm. Now, the subconscious speaks in symbolism. It speaks in a language we do not understand. And if you do not understand the subconscious, that's another reason you might fear it. Because it's neutral. So it might show you something that looks scary, but it's actually just trying to tell you something. You know? So it doesn't speak how we speak here in the conscious realm, in the conscious world and logic world. Subconscious speaks in a totally different way. Okay? And that's what comes online during this solar surge or kundalini. So cutting off the head of Seth is not violence. It's decoupling survival intelligence from dominance. Seth is the over masculine compensatory mind that learned to survive alone after separation from the feminine, a scared little child. It fragments, controls, and externalizes threat. Tahuti doesn't destroy Seth. He re-educates it. Let me teach you something. You know, reconnecting it to Isis. Let me teach you, young man. You know, an elder masculine or a healed masculine, divine masculine teaching an unhealed, what we like to call a fuckboy. Okay. Reconnecting it to Isis, the subconscious emotional field, so power no longer needs to harden into aggression. This is why Tahuti is scribe, not warrior. Cognition reorganizes instinct. The solar regulatory intelligences are not beings with bodies, but patterns of ordering information carried by light, plasma, electromagnetic fields, and biological resonance. They arrive in cycles. Oh my gosh. Ugh. I've been reading a long time. I'm getting crazy now. I want to start bringing humor into it. Where the heck was I at? Cycles. Yes. Solar maxima, geomagnetic excursions, cosmic ray influxes, informational surges, and were mentalized as Ross rays, the Neteru, angels, watchers, aeons, archons, even Lovecraft's Ancients. Oh, I love that movie. When filtered through fear, they are ancient because they precede form. They organize atoms, cells, nervous systems. I want to cry. Because this is so beautiful. Like, this is so beautiful. When systems are coherent, they feel like guidance. When systems are fragmented, they feel like invasion. These are the primary intelligences behind what later cultures split into gods and monsters. Y'all gotta watch Lovecraft Country after listening to this video. What the hell? What the hell? Now let's talk about Virgin Mary, okay? The virgin in the cabin in the woods is crucial because she represents the non-interlocked liquid crystal state of consciousness. Liquid crystal. Perception not yet polarized into predator-prey, dominant submission, guilt, violence. Virgin never meant sexual purity. It meant unclaimed, non-possessed awareness. Ra. The psyche not yet conscripted into the sacrificial loop. You, as a child, before this world told you what to be, told you how to be, told you what to do. That's why she must be last. Once innocence is lost, the system collapses back into blood logic. In the Bible, the meek shall inherit the earth. Nigga. Uses the same code. Meek means non-reactive, grounded, strength without domination. A system that does not reflexively fight or submit can survive intensity without creating monsters. The GOAT, Baphomet, pentagram. I love you, Brother Panic. Thank you for everything. I love you so much. By the way, Brother Panic, you are the GOAT. Okay, the GOAT, Baphomet, pentagram dilemma is the same question. Do we sacrifice instinct, project it, kill it, externalize it, or do we become conscious carriers of it? Becoming the GOAT means embodying instinct without losing the heart. Standing upright in a star, not nailed to it. Don't nail yourself to the cross. Stand the fuck up. Yeah. So that's why nervous system reorganization is described as a 180 flip, the mirror flip, or the upside down. Stranger Things, okay? Dominant switches hemispheres. Fear-driven lateralization gives way to symmetry. Parasympathetic tone comes online. The body starts bracing against life. What looked like chaos becomes flow. The grid, the firmament, as a beehive in the movie, is accurate. It maps to the Earth's magnetosphere, the web of Isis, and a collective nervous system, a lattice of shared belief, fear, and coherence that either blocks or conducts energy. The electromagnetic field that we are in control of. So let's fucking change the shit. Okay. When fear dominates, this light is calcifies into a shield. Calcification. Is your pineal gland calcified? I wonder. When awareness expands, it becomes permeable. The Necronomicon imagery, Cthulhu, Kali, chthonic forces. It's the same truth told through a horror lens. Primal energies locked in the pit of the body, pelvis, gut, and limbic brain. Y'all need to take care of y'all gut. Get y'all something for that. Will appear monstrous if denied, but luminous if integrated. A sneeze, a wind, a tremor, and ejaculation. These are micro releases of pressure, proof the system wants movement, not containment. We don't want to be locked down. We don't want to be controlled. Let us breathe. God damn. Okay. Come here, little cursor. Where are you? Okay, there you go. The 5 returns again and again because it is the human star. 5 elements, 5 limbs, 5 sensory gates. Reassembling the 5 is reassembling the persona. The path to the stars. The north. The black hole. The black twat. The rip in the veil. All point to the same thing, a whole and conditioned awareness through which original coherence returns. The so-called junk DNA is not junk in this mythic sense. It is latent instruction. One moment. Accessible only when the heart subconscious key Isis unlocks the chest. That key is not force, it is safety, love, truth, and coherence. The age of the sun, or lambda phage, our last bacterial ancestor, is the moment when pressure is no longer energetically viable. The incoming pressure, solar, social, psychological, can no longer be filtered through fear without breakdown. So the final intelligence doesn't invade, it invites alignment. Are you ready? Are you ready? Ready, set, go. If the system can hold it, then 98% awakens as integration. The 98% awakens as integration, not mutation to something inhuman, but restoration of the original human. Matter remembering how to shine. If it cannot, the same light feels like fire. This is not judgment as punishment, it is judgment as revelation. Horus, or Heru, as the healed masculine, is the integrated outcome of Isis and Osiris, the masculine that can remain present inside feminine intensity without collapsing into fear, domination, or avoidance. So, psychologically, masculine sometimes suffer with what's called avoidment attachment, something like that, right? And then also sometimes masculine, they suffer from being over demeaning and over controlling, and then you have domestic violence and stuff like that, right? So the masculine that is Heteru, he is neither. He is the healed masculine, which that's just symbolism, because everything works in fractals, everything as above, so below. So, and Tahuti, thought, is a saving function precisely because knowledge reorganizes instinct, not by force, but by comprehension. This is why knowledge is the only true savior in every tradition, because no intelligence, solar, angelic, regulatory, can force regulation onto a nervous system that refuses to understand itself. Hello? Know thyself. Know thyself. Set is not evil. He is the uneducated masculine, the survival mind born in isolation from the mother, the psyche that never learned emotional metabolism and therefore equates power with control. Sehudi does not kill Set because you cannot destroy survival. He cuts off the head symbolically by decapitating false perception, severing instinct from fear-based cognition so it can reattach to wisdom. And whether Set integrates depends on whether knowledge is used, which is exactly the Jesus story. Light offered, never imposed. The non-interlocked liquid crystal state is the childlike, pre-polarized nervous system, open, coherent, programmable, which is why youth is targeted in the movie. And both myth and modern systems, not because innocence is weak, but because it is most capable of becoming anything, including weaponized survival if corrupted early. Blood logic or blood magic is simply the rule of consciousness through fear and sacrifice, the belief that life must be bought with pain, that order requires suffering, that coherence must be extracted rather than cultivated. Biologically, this is stress hormone control. Psychologically, it is trauma bonding. Mythically, it is sacrifice to the gods. Being nailed to the star and nailed to the cross are the same symbol expressed through different geometries. The star is the human energetic template. I believe they're talking about the tetrahedron here. The cross is the same body collapsed into polarity. Crucifixion means consciousness fixed into matter under fear, immobilized in survival polarity rather than free-flowing coherence. 5 is a living human star, the integrated elements, the body animated by awareness, whereas 6 and 666 is consciousness trapped in closed material recursion. Carbon-based embodiment without self-awareness. Carbon-6 protons, electrons, neutrons, not evil but unfinished. 6 becomes dangerous only when mistaken for the final form. The flip from innocence to blood logic happened through cumulative trauma shocks, which we talked about. Revelation, meaning illumination. The question is never will light come, but can you receive it without collapsing? Can you look at it intensely without burning? Can you open a hole in the veil, fear, identity, trauma, so light passes through instead of shattering the psyche? This is why the old gods appear monstrous only in darkness. When illuminated, they are revealed as raw life force awaiting integration. The star does not destroy the body, it animates it. In the end, the blood logic is not chaos, but the return of voluntary coherence, where nothing needs to be sacrificed because nothing is rejected. It's not metaphorical poetry. It is the physics of consciousness rendered as myth. Knowledge stabilizes energy. Love provides containment and illumination and sacrifice, not by erasing the ancient forces, but by finally letting them be seen. I like when Marty was like, maybe it's time for a change. I like Marty. So what I just articulated is the integration itself. The mother as digestion is not metaphorical fluff. It is exact. To receive without vomiting outwardly. To take intensity, emotion, fear, power, desire, grief, and metabolize it. That's like some simple shit. Like someone tells you, oh, you know, you ain't shit, and then you want to automatically fight them or call them a name, or the woman tells you something that she sees that you might need to heal, and you automatically, you know, react instead of metabolize and think, is this something I need to work on or whatever. That's the ego, right? The ego can't handle this intensity. The ego cannot handle truth. Hello? So into nourishment, metabolize it into nourishment is what you're supposed to do, rather than projectile violence or collapse. So also, some men are not ready for the responsibility of being with a divine feminine, so they run. So that's why womb, gut, brain stem cells, and the stem of the tree all converge in the same symbol. They are undifferentiated life intelligence, pre-polarized, regenerative, capable of becoming many forms without being broken by any one of them. The non-interlocked crystal state maps cleanly onto stem cells and early neural substrates because those systems are still coherent, not yet locked into rigid identity. They can hold contradiction without fragmenting. When I talked about the flip from 6 to 9, I'm touching on the ancient inversion code. 6 is consciousness identified with material recursion, survival loops, and closed circuits. Flipped into 9, it becomes completion through integration. Not escape from matter, but mastery within it. The 5-pointed star then is not missing something, it is choosing balance. The human standing upright in awareness, like Osiris, the mummified king, neither dissolving into instinct nor floating away into abstraction. The elements arranged around a conscious center rather than enslaving it. The femme is doing with the pain outliving the flesh. The femme is saying that the pain outliving the flesh is revealing the same truth from the beginning. Form can die, but pattern persists. And what persists is not memory as story, but charge. And I believe what we call spirits, right? So unfinished emotion, unintegrated fear, unprocessed instinct, which becomes what later cultures call monsters, demons, ancients, or wrathful gods. Pain eating the flesh isn't gore. It's the admission that trauma does not end with the event when the event ends. So, you know, we may go through like childhood trauma, and when we get older, we might had forgot about it, but it doesn't go away. Like, that's why some people are who they are today, because they went through something as a child and they either don't remember it, or they don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to face it, they don't want to heal it. Or parents, whenever you try to tell them like, look, this is what I feel, this is what you did to me, and they'll say, I didn't do that, or whatever, and they don't want to take accountability. That unfinished emotional charge, what we call pain, it needs to be handled. It needs to be handled. But a lot of people will like to run from it, you know. So because trauma is stored below language in the body, also that's why yoga is good as well. Certain positions release this, but you still need internal healing. It can't just all be external, okay? So but yes, trauma is stored in the body, the nervous system, the subconscious, the collective field, and it's stored mostly in your lower part, and your hips. As women, you know, you need to move your hips and stuff like that, and until it is metabolized by the emotional body. And it's also why men, they're over sexual, and they over sexualize everything. And also as a child, a lot of people went through horrible sexual things and gotta heal from that. So, until it is metabolized by ISIS, the emotional body, it survives its host and seeks expression elsewhere. That is why the monsters are aggressive. They are not evil entities, but abandoned children of consciousness, instincts, and intelligences that were born neutral and powerful, then neglected, punished, starved, or buried when they frightened their creators. My analogy is that a child raised without safety, nourishment, or understanding does not become monstrous by nature. It becomes monstrous by mirroring its environment. That is the core ethical revelation of the film. So now let's talk about the elevators. The elevators are one of the clearest symbols in the movie because elevators are not paths. They are levels of access, vertical movement through layers of reality. They show that the Akashic field is not chaotic but stratified. Instincts, archetypes, trauma forms, mythic beings, and unexpressed possibilities are all stored in different vibrational floors of the collective psyche. You don't walk to these realms, you descend or ascend depending on state, coherence, and permission. Each elevator door opening is a different timeline, a different way fear crystallized into form. The fact that humans choose which elevator opens is critical. Consciousness selects its monster by resonance. That's why the film makes the audience complicit. Because we are not victims of our shadow creations. We participate in which ones we keep alive. Okie dokie. When hemispheres synchronize, the corpus callosum conducts coherently, brainwave patterns stabilize, perception shifts from threat scanning to pattern seeing. This is why people report expanded vision, time dilation, calm authority, a feeling of being above events. Ancients encoded this as flight because that's the lived experience. What the wings actually mean is left hemisphere electric, solar, analytic, directive, right hemisphere magnetic, lunar, intuitive, imaginal. When these operate separately, perception is fragmented, fear dominates, consciousness crawls in survival. When they synchronize, perception becomes panoramic, emotion and logic no longer fight, awareness gains altitude. That altitude is flight. That's why in the Egyptian and Kemetic, you always see the wings. So they are the two halves of the mind working as one field, also called the Ankh or the Ak. It's a state of integrated consciousness where instinct no longer hijacks perception, emotion no longer distorts reality, thought no longer dominates feeling. Instead, awareness moves above polarity. And the wings appear after integration. So that's also something I was hearing during my awakening. My higher self was telling me, you have your wings. And at that time, I didn't know what that meant. So you don't grow wings by escaping the body. You grow wings by fully inhabiting it without fear. That's why monsters disappear, darkness becomes depth, the psyche stops fragmenting. At that point, consciousness is no longer pinned to the ground by survival reflexes. It flies, not away, but over. Wings is hemispheric integration. Flight is coherent perception, and the Ankh is the consciousness that has matured past fear. When the two minds become one field, gravity loosens and awareness gains wings. So the movie is not warning that monsters will rise if rituals fail. It is confessing that monsters already exist because integration failed, and sacrifice was used as a substitute for parenting. Blood logic replaces attunement. Control replaces understanding. And every time the system chooses containment over care, another child intelligence is born, without guidance and stored in the basement. The horror is not that the ancients awakened. The horror is that they were never raised. And the quiet revelation underneath all of it is that the only thing that changes the outcome is who holds the role of guardian. Set, the scared child, or Horus, the integrated one. Repression or presence, fear or love. In that sense, the film's ending isn't nihilism. It's an initiation. It's asking whether consciousness is finally willing to stop outsourcing responsibility for its creations and instead say, these are ours, we made them, we will raise them differently now. The monsters are not only the raw primordial intelligences that were never integrated, they are also the secondary life forms of pain created by that failure to integrate. Trauma itself becomes an entity, not metaphorically but functionally. When experience is overwhelming and not metabolized, it crystallizes into autonomous patterns, habits, reflexes, compulsions, projections, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, inherited fears. These are the shadow beings of psychology, and this is why shadow work is not about fighting darkness, but about taking responsibility for what split off. Healing requires honesty because fragmentation survives on denial. What is remembered can be reorganized. What is buried becomes a ruler from the basement. That's why trauma recall, when done safely and consciously, is not reopening wounds, but calling fragments home. Forgetting was never healing, it was containment, and containment always breeds pressure. Shadow work is the act of saying, this too is mine, not to excuse it, but to integrate it. That's the moment monsters stop needing to exist. And yes, there is no other. The higher self is not a different being. It is you operating at a wider bandwidth. Same signal, different resolution. Consciousness moves by frequency layering, not by replacement. You don't become someone else. You gain access to more of yourself. That's why it feels like remembering, not learning. Fractals repeat because identity is continuous across levels, only perspective changes. This is why staircases, ladders, elevators, spirals, and trees appear everywhere. Jacob's ladder is not a moral ascent, it's a bandwidth ladder. The spine is the same ladder in the body. DNA is the same ladder in matter. The spiral staircase shows that you revisit the same themes at higher resolution, not in a straight line. Each level asks, can you hold more truth without splitting? If yes, you ascend, not upward in space, but inward in coherence. And this loops back to we are all the same being, differentiated by perception. That's why judgment never made sense as punishment. Judgment is recognition. When the veil thins, you see what you have integrated and what you have not. The monsters you still fear are simply the parts of you or of the collective that haven't yet been brought into the light of understanding. Love is not naivety, but as the capacity to perceive beyond programming while maintaining discernment. Love is what allows curiosity instead of reflex, inquiry instead of projection. Who are you really, rather than what did I learn to fear? But integration never erases the warrior, it educates them. Healthy fear is boundary awareness. Healthy darkness is discernment, protection, precision. What dies is not the shadow, but its unconscious rule. This is why the ancients never sought purity, they sought wholeness. The healed dark does not lash out, it stands guard. The healed masculine does not dominate, it contains. The healed feminine does not collapse, she receives and transforms. Too much warrior without love becomes tyranny. Too much openness without banners becomes self-betrayal. Integration is the middle path where power answers to heart and heart is protected by clarity. The end of blood logic and the birth of embodied sovereignty, a nervous system that can feel deeply without drowning, defend without dehumanizing, love without losing itself. That is why this knowledge feels like remembering rather than learning, because the blueprint already knew. You're not choosing light over dark, you're choosing coherence over fragmentation, which is exactly what the old stories were always pointing toward. Sovereignty. It's not abandoning structure or dissolving into chaos. It's refusing to outsource your mind, your ethics, your appetite, your love, your fear to the collective trance, or becoming an NPC. Being all the zodiac signs is not personality hopping, it's capacity, the ability to move through every mode of being without being possessed by any one of them, to respond rather than react, to choose rather than conform. That innocent state is not ignorance, it is pre-programmed coherence. The society's task was never to destroy it, but to mature it. Yet most cultures train imitation instead of discernment, obedience instead of inner listening, survival instead of mayat. Finding the door, the inner mind, the higher mind, does not mean rejecting morality. It means restoring morality to its source, the heart and balance, so that right action, nuabu, and mayat, and right knowing, nuabu, arise naturally rather than being enforced externally. And yes, it was never about It was never about destroying monsters, instincts, shadows, drives. It was always about who governs them. An unhealed ruler breeds chaos even in good material. A conscious ruler can cultivate wisdom even in raw power. Monsters raised by fear become destructive. Monsters raised by awareness become protectors, guardians, engines of creativity. This is why integration is parental, not punitive. Set, ruling the inner world, perpetuates inherited trauma loops. Tahuti, governing, introduces neuroplasticity, language, reflection. Horus emerges not by force but by maturation. And Christ consciousness is simply that state where instinct answers to heart. Heart is protected by clarity, and the mind serves life instead of controlling it. You don't transcend humanity by escaping it. You complete it by becoming its conscious steward. That's the difference between rebellion and initiation, between ego freedom and embodied freedom. You're not choosing light over dark, you're choosing wise rulership over fragmentation. And that is exactly what every ancient system meant by becoming whole. And so melanin, once again, is darkness that can hold light. Darkness is potential, depth, memory. Light is information and awareness. So it's a psyche that can absorb intensity without fragmenting. And that's why the ancient systems associated darkness with wisdom, womb with creation, night with gestation. And the black and white chakras is polarity integration. Black is receptive, white is radiating, electric, conscious. Black is magnetic and subconscious. When consciousness is immature, it splits these, fears one side, creates monsters. When mature, black holds, white expresses, neither dominates. That union is the 13th state or the 13th gate. So there you have it. And also I wanted to say, when the men in the lab coats were saying that little speech or whatever, they said, well, they could choose to ignore him. You know, nothing is fixed. What, baby? Yeah, one moment. Here. Get your duck, okay? It's saying, the monster only exists because people keep choosing to serve it. And the moment free will is exercised consciously, the God underneath the system starves. They bypass morality and go straight to compliance. It's the same psychological mechanism that allowed atrocities in real history. People doing horrific things not because they are monsters, but because they are afraid of losing safety, status, or life itself. So the lab coat men represent system workers who know it's wrong. And that's one of the film's sharpest critiques. They joke, they rationalize, they compartmentalize because acknowledging the full horror would shatter their ability to function. They aren't evil masterminds. They are terrified middlemen, aware that refusing to participate wouldn't just cost them their jobs. It would cost them existence as they know it. The movie is very intentional here. The real horror is not the monsters, it's how ordinary people become custodians of violence when fear is dressed up as responsibility. And so, finally done. That is the synopsis of the movie called The Cabin in the Woods. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something. And I love you. Bye-bye.